It's Yahminah again. I hope everyone is doing well, and I hope you've had a good week so far. Today I am speaking about African American history, tidbits of information that I want to share, and it's information that I found interesting and I just wanted to share it with you. And African American history includes people who identify as Black or African American who may have European ancestry, African ancestry, as well as Native American ancestry, but of course it's always predominantly African ancestry from during the time of slavery, and some also may be the descendants of free Black people in the USA. And in my family, we have African ancestry with an enslaved history, as well as European ancestors and Native American ancestors. But every family is different, and I identify as African American, and I also identify as Black or Black American. So first off, I wanted to say is, and of course I have notes, first what I wanted to say is, growing up in the USA, there's definitely a lack of information in high schools and middle schools of the history of African American people as well as other people of color. So there are things that I have learned about my ancestors, my Black ancestors, predominantly from either speaking to relatives of mine or from, because of my ancestry, having a curiosity about knowing more about my ancestors, that I would do my own research and find out things. And in high school and middle school is greatly lacking. Like, the biggest time that we would get a lot of history about Black people and African American people is when Black History Month would roll around every February, and we would get lessons and information, and then we would have to do research papers ourselves and share that with the class. So that was the biggest time that we received a lot more information about Black history, African American history. And with that, I would say, yeah, it's definitely lacking, and it was very, very little information. So I was actually a person who really enjoyed history class, but definitely that ancestry information was lacking. Also, I would say there were things that I learned as an adult about other groups of color that I either learned in museums or I learned in my own personal research from just having an interest in people as well. So I didn't know about Japanese internment camps. I barely knew about the civil rights history, which is crazy, but thankfully I did research a lot of stuff too and was spoken to about it by my aunts. So yeah, so Japanese internment camps, civil rights movement, also Native American children being put in boarding schools in Canada and in the USA. Stephanie Hartle actually did a video about a Canadian boarding school that recently dug up a lot of stuff that she actually ended up making an hour-long video about 3 weeks ago, and she shared it. It's very in-depth and it's very informative, and it's very sad as well. But I didn't learn about that stuff until I went to college. I actually took a class in college. It was the only class offered about Native American studies or history. I forget the name of the class, but it was about Native American history, and we actually did learn about boarding schools at that point, and I had no idea. I also feel like with high school and middle school history, I feel like they made us think that Native American people were actually extinct, except for like the few that were still alive. The way they taught it, you would think that everybody had passed away, didn't exist anymore, and it's kind of crazy because Native Americans are still going strong and still making sure that their voices are heard. So I was kind of surprised about that. Also, I did learn, okay, so those are the things I'll say about that. Also, what I did learn recently, which is good, is that in 2020, I read an article online that said that all Connecticut high schools are going to be made, they mandatorily have to offer an elective course on Black history, African American history, and Latinx studies. I typically don't use the word Latinx, but for the purposes of how they shared it in their online article, I'll just say that. But they are going to make it mandatory in all high schools in Connecticut to do so, and I thought that was really good. But it took all of these years. I've been out of high school for years and years and years. So yeah, it's kind of shocking that it took that long. But yeah, so they're gonna be offering that, and that's gonna be mandatory. So they actually have to start that this year or sometime in 2022. So the first tidbit of information I wanted to share is that Seneca Village existed, and it existed from 1825 to 1827, 1825 to 1857. I actually first found out about Seneca Village on a post on Instagram like randomly last year, and I actually finally looked up some YouTube videos this year. I was able to get more information about it, and it existed for those amount of years. It was predominantly free black people who were freed slaves from New York State itself. Also, maybe possibly escaped slaves from southern states. Also, there were a few Germans and a few Irish people who lived within that community, and it was in a small portion of what is now known as Central Park in the northwestern region, and it had a little over 1,000 people, I believe it said. So they existed there, and after, let me make sure, and after they were making an attempt to start building the Central Park, is how they framed it so that they could start making it a thing. They actually displaced all the people that lived in that village. But yes, there was a predominantly black village that existed in what is now known as Central Park, and it was removed forcibly mostly and made into an entire park, even though it would have been nice and interesting if at least a portion of the park could have stayed the way it was and we could have still had a park around it, but that did not happen. So the second bit of information I want to share is, okay, so I actually reached out to Performance today, and they have not gotten back to me. It's been a few weeks now, and I've actually sent 2 emails to get verification for the information, because I kept trying to Google it and look it up on their website, and it was not giving me the information I am sure I heard. So this information is accurate, except for I'm not sure if the name I'm going to give you is the right name, the right person, but the story is true to this particular person. So with Performance Today, they are a radio program that goes on for about 2 hours in the morning, and it is a classical radio program, and they feature music from classical times, and it could also include romance periods, Baroque music, different kinds of music that are what we would all call classical music. And they speak about composers, musicians, as well as conductors, and they do make sure they include people of color and black people, and they especially did that during Black History Month, but they just generally feature an artist or 2 or 3 during the 2-hour program, and they feature different pieces that were written before we were born or after we were born, and the program is really nice. I really like it. I don't listen to it every day. I used to listen to it every day, but I haven't been recently. But during the month of February, they shared a story about a conductor and a composer, and I'm just hoping I'm getting the right radio program as well. And his name was Jon Batiste. His name is Jon Batiste. He is alive and well, and he's in his 40s, I think, 50s maybe, and he's from Louisiana. And the story that he shared, which was like eye-opening to me because I didn't know this was a thing. So one of the things I did learn in history class, which was not expounded on, was that we learned that there were enslaved people and there were free black people, and I had no idea where the free black people came from. I thought they were like indentured servants who were freed sometime in the USA. I thought they were people who actually had traveled here by themselves and went to Canada or went to the US. So I wasn't sure. So this kind of gave me an inkling of where this came from. And first, so Jon Batiste told the story on a radio program that he had a female relative in Louisiana who was actually an enslaved woman, and she actually fell in love with her slave owner's son, and he fell in love with her. They ended up having 10 children. So due to their relationship, she was emancipated at a certain point. She actually became a slave owner herself and was able to buy the freedom of 5 of her 10 children at some point, and she was a free black woman. So I was like, oh, okay, so she got emancipated. I forget which year it was, but yeah, she was emancipated before slavery ended, and she was a free black woman, freed some of her children, owned slaves. I don't know when she stopped owning it because the story wasn't elaborated on. I haven't been able to Google it and find information about it. Maybe I need to try harder. So that's the second story. The third story I wanted to share is about Queen Latifah. So I actually recently started following the Ancestry channel on YouTube, and it's the same people that do Ancestry.com, the DNA research, which I've done before. And from that channel, they did a video interview with her in February 2020, and I found out the coolest thing that made me cry. So it turns out that Queen Latifah's family is descended from a free black woman, and she did not know this. So she found out when she sat down with the interviewer. He told her, I think it was a he, anyway, he told her to look down at this paperwork that he was showing her, and when she looked down, he said, what do you see? And she's like, a name. She told him the name. He said, when you see the name of someone on paper, that means they were counted in the census. This is your ancestor. This is your direct ancestor. She was counted in the census. She was a free black woman, and she had been a slave up until 1792 when she was emancipated. And so all of her descendants were free black people. And that made me cry because even though I heard Jon Batiste's story, if that's the right person, I was actually crying when I heard Queen Latifah's story because I was listening to her responding to it. I was shocked. I was just like, that's how free black people existed? Because I'm pretty sure there were people who were black folks who did travel possibly during those times when others were traveling, but for her to gain her freedom in a time when slavery was still around was so cool to hear about. So the last bit of information I'm going to share with you is this book here. It is called The Warmth of Other Suns, and it is the epic story of America's Great Migration by Isabel Wilkerson. So I've read this book twice. I've met the author. She actually signed my book for me. She was a very sweet lady, very talented lady. And what she did with this book is she interviewed thousands of people, and she also featured 3 families in particular in this book. But she interviewed thousands of people, compiled information, so that when she compiled this information, she was able to give such a detailed tracing of where people came from and where they ended up moving to during this Great Migration. So first off, just to reiterate, immigration, or not reiterate, but just to say, immigration is when people travel from one country to another, and they do it for economic reasons, to stay safe, to reunite with their family. For whatever reason, they end up moving from one country to another. That's immigration. With migration is when you move from one part of your country or the country that you live in to another part of your country for work, for economic purposes, for safety, all of those same reasons. So this migration was within the USA. It was black or African American people moving from the southeast of the country to the northwest, northwest, northeast, or to the southwest and to the west. So she was able to pinpoint which states people moved in from the southwest to which parts of the country they ended up moving into during the Great Migration. and she pinpointed it on the nose. So for one example, because I do not remember all the examples, I actually need to read this book a third time because it's so juicy. But one example is she said that people who are from Florida ended up moving to New York State, and that was just one of the states that people from Florida ended up moving to. My grandmother was one of the children of the Great Migration. My great-grandmother took her from Florida in the 1940s. They moved up to New York State. My family, my mom was born in New York State. I was born in New York City. My siblings were born in New York City. And this is just my maternal side. With my father's side, we are from Louisiana. And yeah, so some of the family has moved to New York. But all over the place. So I have family all over the place, but she pinpointed that Floridians ended up in New York State, and then I believe some other northern states as well. I just don't remember the rest of them because I found my particular family's line. So this book is fabulous if you want to learn more about the Great Migration, and I just think it's such a good read. So that is the end of my video. I hope it was interesting. And if there is any information that you've learned that you would like to share with me, please share it in the comments. Otherwise, have a good rest of your week, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.